Okay, I'm back. This is a short video on 12 books that I have enjoyed reading um, more than others, that I found fascinating. Not all of them fascinating, but most of them fascinating and have been in fact impactful on me. Um, some obviously more enjoyable than others, some more fascinating than others, and some more impactful than others. And sometimes a book has been all three, and sometimes maybe just like fascinating and enjoyable, but not so impactful. Okay, so and these are all obviously book recommendations. I highly recommend you read them because I think most of you will also derive some kind of pleasure or benefit from them. Number 12 in reverse order. And the blurbs here on the bottom, or the little short summaries, are generated by ChatGPT, and then I will comment on what is said here too. So number 12, James Thurber. Thurber is a bygone author. He writes satire. So I was gonna say comedy, but that's not the word I was looking for. But anyway, so Thurber, James Thurber. If you haven't read James Thurber, it's it's some a little bit of satire, some light humor, and just yeah. If you want to be put into a good mood, just read some James Thurber. I also recommend Max Beerbaum if you haven't heard of Max Beerbaum, but Thurber's a little bit more lighthearted. Anyway, so Lanterns and Lances, one of my favorites of his. He has several books that I like. As it says here, it's a collection of humorous essays and sketches. He does his own also caricatures. He draws people, and so does Beerbaum actually. Beerbaum's actually pretty famous for his caricatures. Anyway, so it has obviously it's just uh humor, and yeah, he has commentaries on, although I don't read it too much for the commentary, but it has social commentary, so about American culture, about language, journalism, and human absurdities. And yeah, his humor is kind of straightforward, so kind of like deadpan, as it says, dry humor here. Um, so 12, Thurber. Thurber is just a pleasure read. It's a pleasure read, and yeah, a little bit of commentary, social commentary. Number 11, Along This Way by James Weldon Johnson. James Weldon Johnson started off very poor, and basically he accomplished a lot in his life. And he was, as it says here, African American, became a poet. He also became a playwright, a lawyer, a civil rights activist, and 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 that's a common story. It's not it doesn't mean it's like easy to accomplish, but it's just the way he writes and the way he tells his story has made it one of my favorite autobiographies. So, Along This Way by James Weldon Johnson. If you ever feel like you need some inspiration to read about somebody starting from a much lower status or a much lower station in life than you started from, probably, and what he was able to accomplish, um, I would recommend reading Along This Way. I've always read a lot of African American history, so I have a lot of reading in like the Harlem Renaissance, a lot of reading in like the after the Harlem Renaissance, the Reformation, um, what was it called? The period. And anyway, and then some other authors, but this book stands out as one of my favorites. The Outsider, Richard Wright. Richard Wright is another black author. And the Outsider is memorable for me. One, because the I forget the main character's name. I think it was David. Cross Damon. I was going to say Damon Cross. It's Cross Damon. Um, and in this story, Cross Damon um is involved in a train wreck. He's on the train, but his wallet falls off. His wallet ends up falling next to a guy who is basically mutilated and is misidentified as him. And so the reports are that he has died. And he decides, because his life isn't going the way it wants to go, and he's got some women problems and some family issues, he decides to just go along with it and pretend that he's dead. Um, yeah, and okay, and so the things that happened to him were not like terribly interesting, but his psychological makeup as somebody who would do that, I thought was interesting. Um, and 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 during his adventures, let's say he ends up killing somebody, and then a detective is on the chase for him. And at one point, the detective goes into his room and looks at his bookshelves to get it like a psychoanalyze him a little bit through what he's reading, and he sees on the bookshelf a book by Friedrich Nietzsche, and that was my introduction into Nietzsche. I had never heard of Nietzsche before, and so I'm like, okay, so if Nietzsche shapes this guy's thinking and like character, let me read Nietzsche. And yeah, that's how I started with philosophy through Richard Wright. Anyway, so but the book is interesting. Yeah, the book is I think it's just a good book. It's just and Richard Wright's a good author. So yeah, as you can see here, the book explores alienation, and that's just the Black experience in America, freedom, morality, and the individual's place in a godless, absurd world, channeling both existentialist and Marxist themes. Yes, Marxist themes because the communists were trying to convert, uh, trying to get African Americans or Black people onto their side, um, because they take any like minority group and they try to turn them against the majority group for their purposes. But anyway, that's not neither here nor there. You can talk to Barack Obama. Okay, so here we go. Number 9, Confederacy of Dunces. I think I'm running a little black theme here because so Ignatius J. Riley is like one of those New Orleans guys. I don't know if he's completely just like black or African American or he's like this, well, that Cajun mix. Anyway, it's funny stuff. John Kennedy Toole. This is one of the funnier books that I've read, just because Ignatius is such a character, right? Yeah, so he, as it says here, he's bombastic. An eccentric intellectual, so he has a nice little vocabulary, which he uses to attack people and demean people. Um, and the book is a satirical exploration of modern society through the absurdity and dysfunction. Again, I didn't really read too much into the satirical exploration of modern society. It is just like a humorous book on face value. Just this character and his life, he's just a funny guy. And I think you can just read it for that. Anyway, it critiques everything from academia to capitalism, blending slapstick humor with pathos. So I don't doubt it. It's been a long time since I read it, but I don't doubt it. But it's just a good, funny story. And Ignatius is a great character. Okay. Next, number 9, The Fountainhead. I read The Fountainhead. I don't want to say early because I think most people start reading way before I ever started reading books. Like I didn't read my first book. I think it was The Outsider. The Outsider is my first book I ever read, and I didn't read that till I was like 22 years old. First book ever. I went all through junior high, high school without ever reading a book. So you can pretty much figure out what my grades were in high school and junior high. Anyway, so The Fountainhead was like my first like yeah, like I got my feet wet into like some kind of political philosophy through Ayn Rand, with Howard Roark, of course, like what he stood for and what he believed in. Uh, yeah, struck a chord with me. I kind of identified with a lot of it. I kind of had leanings towards that. So, um, yeah, kind of like a libertarian uh, viewpoint. Uh, and so, and it's just a good read. The Fountain is just a great novel. Like when you have a philosophy like Ayn Rand is a good author, right? So, and she has political opinions, right? And she has kind of fairly well developed political opinions, and she expresses this in The Fountainhead, and so she is super popular. Um, but take somebody else like Isabel Patterson, um, who is a much has a much more refined, sophisticated, and deeper understanding of of this political position of individualism or objectivism, or however you want to characterize her political opinion. Isabel Patterson is like 10 times better at at explaining her political opinion and more forceful than Ayn Rand. Like she's just a deeper thinker, but she's not as good an author when it comes to fiction. So Isabel Patterson is fairly obscure, and Ayn Rand is like, yeah, world renowned. But if you really want to understand basically the political opinion that Ayn Rand was espousing, there's a book on the list that's coming up, and it's by Isabel Patterson, and so we'll see it. But strict literature, The Fountainhead. It's kind of like it's like reading oh my God, what's his name? The author of 1984. What? He's one of my favorite authors. Is I'm drawing a blank. And 1984. English. What is his name? Oh my God. Anyway, the author of 1984, right? The champion of anti-totalitarianism. Um, he is a good author, right? He's not the greatest writer, I believe, but he's a very good writer, and so he's very well known, and his political position, through his books. Um, yeah, and so he's world renowned because he's a great storyteller. Ayn Rand is a great storyteller, but it doesn't make him the deepest political thinkers. Okay, anyway, so which I'm not trying to denigrate her so much. I'm just saying there are people that are better uh, when it comes to political thought. Anyway, so number seven, Lolita. Lolita is like, I think Lolita used to be assigned reading in high schools when we weren't so prude, and which is hard to say because like we were always a Puritan, like, yeah, we always had Puritan virtues and Puritan morals, but like today, like Lolita is completely taboo. You will never see. I don't think you won't see Lolita assigned to high schools, or let alone junior high school students anymore. Just because of like just the idea of a 42-year-old man or 45-year-old man, whatever he was, Humbert, sleeping with this 12 or 13-year-old girl is just too 12-year-old girl, too taboo to even like mention to kids, which to me is nonsense, right? Anyway, so the story is, as it says here, it's a controversial yet critically acclaimed novel about Humbert, a man obsessed with a 12-year-old girl who he has an affair with, a sexual affair with, a romantic affair with. And the book is both a disturbing psychological portrait and a linguistic masterpiece. Linguistic masterpiece because Nabokov is a beautiful writer. If you want to know how to write literature and details and expressive, read Nabokov. Copy what Nabokov does. Like so, just on the linguistic side of it, like it's a pleasure to read Nabokov. The disturbing psychological portrait, I didn't find it disturbing. I don't find it disturbing because I don't have the same attitude like this taboo relationship. Yes, it's taboo because it goes against the mores of our times and in our society. But Humbert falls for a very seductive 12-year-old girl. And these people exist. Seductive, hypersexualized, hyper romantic, hyper whatever. These girls exist. And so and I think Humbert is mostly just a regular guy. I don't think he's some like pervert. I don't think he's done this like general, like I wouldn't assume that he's done this with other girls in his life. Um and like he's not some kind of serial like child molester, let's say. I think he just meets Lolita and he falls for her seductive powers, and she has seductive powers and she uses her seductive powers. And so this is just a story about this kind of person, a Lolita, and a regular guy. I think I don't think like I think you can characterize Humbert as like psychologically disturbed, but I think you're really just doing. I think people who do that are just doing it so they're posturing to say, look, I have the right morals, I have the right like virtues, and I have no reason to posture, so I don't care. Like you can think I'm a pervert, you can think I'm deranged, you can think I'm a child molester. I don't care. It's not true, but I just think that Humbert is a regular guy, and not saying all regular guys would do this, but I'm saying a lot of guys would do this. In his circumstances, yeah, it's not so it it's not so uncommon, I think. Anyway, so it's a beautiful told story linguistic wise or like literary wise. Okay, so Lolita, recommended. Beyond Good and Evil. Beyond Good and Evil is probably the second Nietzsche book that I read. It's not the first book that I turned to after reading The Outsider, as I mentioned, but it is one of the books that completely like revolutionized the way I thought about like certain virtues or things that I thought were virtues, like pity, or just like because he basically takes Christian morality and he shows you its genealogy, how it started, and he has an argument, right? Like he argues basically that what is considered virtue is determined basically by popularity or by force. And at one time, the stronger people had certain things that they called virtues, but was basically the characteristics that allowed them to be strong, allowed them to conquer their enemies, allowed them to attain wealth and power. And the things that allow you to attain wealth and power and destroy your enemies, those things you're going to call good because they help you accomplish things that you consider good. And but the people who were conquered, who were subjugated, who were like were basically the meek, the weak, and in a sense the Christians. And so the Christians considered those virtues of the masters of the strong, those were the evil virtues. And so when Christianity became more popular, more widespread, they had a bigger voice in the world and more persuasive as to their teachings, then their values, their Christian values became the good, the virtues. And so Nietzsche's basically saying that Christianity turned morality on its head. It used to be the other way around. Anyway, so I'm not saying he's right or wrong. Um, I'm just saying that like as a picture of like morality and virtues, how it came about and how we are where we are today, like it was fascinating to me to read. Anyway, but I generally agree with a lot of what he's saying. But anyway, uh, shots fired at Christians. Next, 5. The Unbearable Lightness of Being. I cannot explain anything about this book. I read it. It had an impact on me. It made me feel a type of way, but I can't really explain what type of way. And it was such a long time ago that it's hard for me now to recollect just exactly what it was. But let me give you the blurb. It's set during the Prague Spring. The Prague Spring happened in Czechoslovakia when it was still Czechoslovakia, and they were under the dominion, basically, or under the boot of the Soviet Union, right? And they were trying to reform their country to allow for some more freedom. The Russians or the Soviet Union basically thought this was a threat to their control of Europe, and so they invaded Czechoslovakia. Um, but this revolution, this reform, and it's a ubiquitous story. It's a story that like universal story, like people are under the boot of a foreign power, and eventually they're going to rebel because they're going to resent this yoke that's been placed upon them, and they're going to want, yeah, they're going to want their freedom, they're going to want a revolution, and they're going to want to rule themselves. And that's what happened, right? With the Velvet Revolution in like 1989, the Czechs finally freed themselves of Soviet control. Anyway, but that has nothing really that doesn't really tell you too much about the unbearable lightness of being, and I can't. So I'll just read what it says. It follows 4 characters grappling with love, freedom, fidelity, and existential meaning. And this is basically an existentialist book, right? Existential meaning. And Kundera contrasts lightness, which is freedom, and weight, which is responsibility, as metaphor for how he understands life or how we understand life. And yeah, so as I read it, it made me like think about a lot of stuff, and it made me feel kind of like, I don't know, kind of like not like it like not strange, but different. And yeah, no other book has really had that effect on me. Um, so yeah, I recommend The Unbearable Lightness of Being. Sorry for the like vague characterization. Number 4, The God of the Machine. I talked about Isabel Patterson. Isabel Patterson, The God of the Machine to me is one of the best political treaties I've ever read. Like Isabel Patterson is super bright, super articulate, and super forceful in her arguments. And yeah, to me, if I could read any political treatise, any book on politics, it would be this book. I would read this book over and over again. I would read it ahead of um, Tocqueville. I would read it ahead of like the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution or the Federalist Papers. This book to me is just like, yeah, it's a gem. It's not a very well known. It's kind of well known, but not super popular. Obviously, nowhere near like what Ayn Rand's Fountainhead or Atlas Shrugged are. But if you want to get a handle on the individualism and the objectivism that Ayn Rand kind of like follows or preaches, this is a better version that you're going to get from Ayn Rand. It's the foundational text of American libertarian thought. Patterson critiques centralized government and promotes individual liberty and capitalism. Using the metaphor of society as a machine, she argues for spontaneous order, limited government, and moral superiority of the free market. Right? So if you're a conservative, this stuff rings true to you. If you're a liberal, you're keying somebody's Tesla. Okay, number 3. Uh, Philosophical Investigations, Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein is one of my top 3 favorite philosophers. Nietzsche would be another one. I'm not sure about number 3 yet. It's a toss-up. Maybe like Frege. Maybe uh, I don't know. I don't know yet. So I don't know. I don't know who to say, who to put third yet. So it's one of the most influential philosophical works of the 20th century. Philosophical Investigations is a follow-up to his first major book, which is just called the Tractatus. I forget how I even forget the long name. It's like Philosophical Logical Tractatus. But anyway, so it's the Tractatus, which is a book on logic, which is a book on language and meaning, but logic. And he takes a certain approach to doing philosophy in that, and then he has certain core like principles that he believes in. And by the time you get to the investigations, he's changed his mind about how to approach philosophy and how to think about logic and language and meaning. Um, but the philosophical investigations had the same effect on me, kind of that Nietzsche's genealogy of morals. It's just a different approach to philosophy, and his approach and Wittgenstein's approach like requires you to do the things he's asking you to do. So when you read the philosophical investigations, when Wittgenstein says, for example, let's just take something made up. He says, imagine a situation in which somebody presents to you like a lot of money as a gift. And it's kind of unexpected, let's say. Like you wouldn't think this person would give you this kind of money, but he gives you the money. How would you feel at that moment? So this is not philosophical, but I'm just saying when Wittgenstein says something to imagine a scenario or put yourself in a certain circumstance, you have to do it. Because a lot of what he's doing, a lot of the force of his argument is going to rely on you having the same intuitions that he has. And and he's going to count on that. He's going to count on you reflecting on the situations he wants you to reflect about, and then you coming away and with the same intuitions that yeah. And even if you don't have them, when he tells you like what he gets out of the circumstances, what he right like what he thinks is happening, then you're like, wait, that seems right, right? So Wittgenstein, when you do the philosophical investigations, you cannot just read that like in any ordinary book. You have to actually go through the things he's asking you to go through, conceptualize them, imagine them, put yourself in these positions, and then seeing what you would think or like do your best to figure out how you would feel, what you would think in those situations. Okay, it's kind of like just good reading, right? Like if you read a book and you're like, oh, this person did this, and that, and then this happened to him, and like you can just read like that, and you can understand what's happening. But if you don't actually sit there and reflect and think, wait, how would I feel if that happened to me? And then if you put yourself in that situation, then you're like, oh, I would feel kind of bad. Maybe I would feel a little intimidated, and maybe I wouldn't want to come back and into this like I wouldn't want to see this person again, or I would be really like embarrassed to see this. Like you'd have to think deeply about those situations, and then you're doing good reading, and then you can understand the character you're reading about. And then when he does something, it just doesn't come out of the blue. Like, why did he behave this way? No, if you had actually thought about like what's being described, you'd understand why he's behaving that way, given that the author is a good author, right? Anyway, so philosophical investigations, a new approach to doing philosophy, a very rigorous way of doing philosophy, and yeah, just a new approach to logic and meaning or the meaning. And so that's it. I kind of tapered off without any like segue. Number 2, the Thomas Sowell reader. Thomas Sowell, by trade an economist, but he writes on he's a social critic, he's a cultural critic, he's a literary critic somewhat. But he talks about race, education, economics, and Sowell has lots of opinions, lots of conservative opinions, an overwhelming amount of evidence and clear thought. And it's just very, very hard to disagree with Thomas Sowell. Not that I want to. And maybe you might think, well, you just like you already agree with him, so you're just easy. No, like good luck. Good luck reading Thomas Sowell. Good luck reading his short essays explaining something and giving his opinion, and then finding a way to refute him. Right? Like for example, in the Thomas Sowell Reader, he has an essay on the minimum wage. If you were a liberal, you probably think, oh, minimum wage is good for black people, good for Hispanic people, good for the poor people. We want to improve their lives, so let's raise the minimum wage. And you think you're a do-gooder. When it's actually the complete probably opposite is happening. You are costing people their jobs, you are costing people opportunities, and you're impoverishing in general black people and Hispanic people. As Sowell explains during the apartheid, um, when black owned construction companies were underbidding the white construction companies, the black companies were getting hired, the black workers were getting work. And so what the white owned companies did was they they convinced the government to pass minimum wage laws. That way, now if you wanted to hire a construction worker and you had to pay, let's say, $10 an hour, who are you going to hire? A black worker or a white worker? Well, if there's no difference in the job quality, then you're just going to hire a white worker because you're white, right? You're white. Apartheid people making buildings and houses were white. So there's no incentive really to hire the black worker. And so that way the black workers lost their work and their jobs, and companies kind of like, yeah, fell by the wayside. So the minimum wage laws were created to discriminate against black people in South Africa. And it was effective. And you have to understand why it's effective, right? And so it's the same here in America. If you have minimum wage laws, that puts a limit on the number of like entry level workers certain companies can have, because entry level workers don't make you the money. They're not worth the money that you're paying them. If you have to pay them a lot of money, imagine you have to pay an entry level worker $25 to work at McDonald's. Like, yeah, he works 8 hours. That's $200. Is he really generating $200 worth of value for you as a like flipping burgers? Probably not, right? But you have to pay him that. So you're not going to have too many of those people around, and you're not going to be able to like hire people with low skills and then let them little by little get on the job training. Why? Because it's costing you money to have them there like that. If you have to pay him like a high salary, but if you can start people at a low wage, and then as they become more proficient, as they become more effective, as they become more productive for you and your company, then you can afford to pay them more. But what happened is that you were allowed to hire them at a low wage. You were allowed to train them. And so more and more people, more and more poor people, generally black people and Hispanic people in America, get training, get experience, and then it slowly get better wages. But that goes away for the most part with minimum wage laws. So yeah, if you think, oh, minimum wage laws are good, I want to help black people, Hispanic. No, you're doing the opposite. You're walking away thinking you're some do-gooder, but you're not. You're a detriment to society, basically. Anyway, okay, so yeah, yeah. I think you can tell where my political leanings my political leanings are. And so Sowell, highly recommend Thomas Sowell. He has like 30 books. But I like this one because its scope is a little bit broader than some of his other books, but some of his other books are excellent. Finally, The Gay Science. The Gay Science is the first Nietzsche book I picked up, and it just so happens to be my favorite book, just by sheer coincidence. I've read like 10 or 12 of his books, and still The Gay Science is my favorite. And I'm not nostalgic about it just because it was my first one. It's just because, yeah, what he talks about in there and the way he expresses himself in there. So he has a lot of themes going on in The Gay Science. It's aphorisms. It's like two or three sentences, maybe like a paragraph where we're talking about like 10 sentences long about some topic. Nietzsche is probably the most misunderstood philosopher in history. He is also abused, I think, intentionally by people who just appropriate his name and they appropriate him for their cause. So like the Nazis took some of his writings and they say, look, Nietzsche supports what we do. feminists kind of like to beat on him and say, look, he's misogynist. No, he's not. You're just taking a few blurbs and you're giving it your this spurious interpretation. But if you read more Nietzsche, you would find out that he's not. Right. And so this is actually this is a problem with like any philosopher or any writer who writes in aphorisms. This is the same thing with Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein's highly misunderstood because he's kind of an aphoristic writer himself. I think Emerson to some degree. But so yeah, when you read Nietzsche, and let's say you want to know Nietzsche's thought on like the Jews, like you can read one aphorism and come away with a certain interpretation, but it it's not that you can't be right. It's just that it's probably unlikely that you're going to be correct. You have to read, let's say, the whole book and find all of his excerpts or all of his aphorisms when he talks about the Jews. And not only that, you might have to find several of his books which have comments or aphorisms on the Jews, and then you get a better understanding of his ideas or his thought on Jews. Same thing with capitalism, same thing with Christianity, same thing with whatever themes, right? Like you have to read the corpus to understand his thought on any given theme because his style is aphoristic. And so you get like you might find something, let's say on pity on page 10 of the Gay Science. And then you might find something on pity on the genealogy of morals on page 35. Then you might find something on pity on Beyond Good and Evil on page 77. And then you might find something on pity on The Will to Power on page 300 and something. And so you have to find all of these aphorisms or all of these commentaries on pity, and then you have a chance of understanding Nietzsche. But if you don't, you're going to do what most people do and just cherry pick something and then think you've got like yeah you've pegged Nietzsche down on his opinions on pity or Christianity or God or whatever, right? The so I highly recommend when you read Nietzsche, take your time, read a lot before you start to come to any conclusions on any given thing he says. Okay, but yeah, to me Nietzsche, one of the top philosophers of all time. I think just like Nietzsche, Wittgenstein, Aristotle. I'm starting to become a fan of William of Ockham, but just recently, so I'm not really well read on Ockham, but I'm going to be doing some readings on Ockham soon. Okay, so that's the list. Books that have been influential. Here's the list here. Books that I've enjoyed, that I enjoy reading, that I can go to and read again for the most part. Not all books, like just because I enjoy them or like derive a lot of pleasure, I would reread. But I've read Lanterns and Lances several times. I've read Along This Way twice. I've read The Outsider like 3 times. I've read Confederacy Dunces a couple of times. I read The Fountainhead a couple of times. I've read Lolita like 3 times. Beyond Good and Evil, I skim back and forth on sections. So like I don't know. I can't say I've read cover to cover, but I've read like probably all of it several times. The Unbearable Lightness of Being, I only read 1 time, but like yeah, I'm been meaning to do a second reading, but I can't find my copy. The God of the Machine, I've read a couple of times. Philosophical Investigations, philosophy books, I almost never read cover to cover. I cherry pick chapters, I cherry pick sections, and sometimes, like I can't honestly say I've read all of the Philosophical Investigations, but I've read major parts, right? Like on language games, on what you call it. Now I can't think of anything on the philosophical investigations on private language, things like that. So certain themes within it, like I've read the sections that like pertain to that. The Thomas Sowell Reader. I don't know if I've read everything on the Reader, but I read a lot of those essays, and I have like 15 to 20 other books, and I've read a lot of those books. And the Gay Science, yeah, one of my favorites. I can turn to almost any page, and there's going to be some aphorism that makes me sit there and think, and oh yeah, that seems true. That seems right. Why didn't I think of that? Or like that's just like ingenious. And that's my initial reaction, and then I sit there and ponder more and think about whether like is this true? Just because it's interesting and clever and ingenious doesn't mean it's true, right? Like Wittgenstein was a genius, and some of the things like his like picture, his what's it called? His picture theory of meaning is ingenious, but mistaken in my view. So yeah, Frege, philosopher, ingenious, but mistaken in my view. Russell, same thing. But again, like it's just my view. I'm nobody, right? These guys were like world renowned and like some of them legitimate, like Wittgenstein, legitimate genius. Um, but of course, I have my own opinions, objections. Anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent. So these are the books. I recommend them. Check them out. And if you've read them, and yeah, let me know what you think. All right, that's it. I'm out of here. I got to click twice. And see ya.